Rock, Balfira to be specific, could be called the place where time began. It is here where the adamantine tower has stood impassive and flawless for nearly 7,000 years. Legends say the Aedra have erected this monument, where they discussed the fate of Mundus, and where they judged Lorcan and chastised him. Atop of the Tower Zero, Lorcan's heart, his divine spark, was excised, and Auriel shot it far, hoping no one would find it. After that, the Aedra left for Aetherius. The tower lingers to this day. For centuries, it stood there forgotten, while the races of men and mer scrambled and struggled in the brave new world that came to be after the War of Manifest Metaphors ended. In the Middle Merethic era, the Aldmeri explorer Cygnus Direni made his way to what we now call Iliac Bay and discovered the magnificent structure. It is not known why the Direni left the Somerset Isles. Was it for control or for religious and faith reasons? We don't know. Another matter casting shadow of mystery on High Rock is who lived there first. Records often contradict each other when detailing events from so long ago, but here is my best interpretation of this historical conundrum. The men were there first, as evidenced by the remains of their settlements were found dating back to 1000th year of Merethic era. Then Direni arrived, discovered Adamantine Tower and tribes of men living in its shadow. As the Direni Cygnus probably arrived only with her crew and was in no position to enter conflict with the local tribes which outnumbered her. However, being an Aldmeri, that is a magically inclined elf, she could access the tower, which was a mystery to man. As such, they might have viewed her with a degree of reverence and welcomed the Aldmer in their midst. As more Direni arrived, the men and elves coexisted, respecting the men's rights as they were there first, and that's why Ryan Direni bought the Isle of Balfira in 461st year of First Era. They have lived there for centuries, ruling over men, who perhaps viewed them with veneration, but still, the Direni were guests in High Rock. Who the Direni were? Where did they come from? Where did they go? All these questions deserve a discussion of their own, one which we might enjoy at another time. So the people living in High Rock were Needs. They have lived in simple tribal societies. They lived off the land as hunters and foragers in unity with nature. With time, this lifestyle would become known as Druidism. As the Direni settled the Balfira Island with their sophistication, technology and magic, the Needs welcomed them, and in time they respected the elves enough to do their bidding. A society developed where Direni were the ruling caste of nobles, and the Needs were workers and laborers, subservient to the elves, some willingly, some reluctantly. But, unlike the ruthless Aelids of the Cyrodiil, the Direni treated their human subjects with benevolence. In time, both races were comfortable with each other, that Direni began taking needy concubines. One can imagine it was considered a great honor and privilege to have your daughter bear children into the elven bloodline. Centuries passed, and the number of half-elves only grew. The Direni viewed them for what they were, people of mixed race and diluted blood, but they did recognize them as people closer to them than Needs. The Direni called them Beratu, in their language meaning half. Over time, this term evolved into Breton, the name we all now know. While the elves acknowledged the lineage of Bretons and granted them positions and titles among the Needs, these half-bloods were not allowed to marry into elven families. Very prominent characteristic of the Needs living in High Rock are their beliefs. They insisted to live in peace and unity with nature they believed to be part of, and so they lived in harmony. When Aldmer brought their religion to High Rock, men were quick to adapt the Aldmeri god Jeffre, or Ifre as they called it. Direni, however, did not share only their faith with the people. They have also brought technology and, most importantly, concept of a unified, advanced civilization. As with many things of Aldmeri origin, the Needs embraced the culture of their guests, but not all were eager to abandon their ancient traditions. Accepting Ifre was easy. It was a unifying trait that connected both sides, but building cities, farmlands and ports, required local wild to be conquered. Eventually, two groups emerged from Breton society: Druids of Galen and the Word. As regular Bretons built walls, dug moats, and sow grain, the Druids understood that nature must be tamed to allocate all of that, but they still called for respect and protection of nature, while the Word left cities altogether and settled in a wild, living in isolation from greater world. Needs of High Rock led relatively peaceful life among Aldmer. Unfortunately, same cannot be said about their kin in Cyrodiil. While the Direni mingled with their subjects, the Aelids imposed the most tyrannical rule over the men of Cyril. Eventually, the cup of pain overflowed, and vicious uprising began in one of the Aelid cities. What once was a single cry for freedom quickly turned into a roaring thunder of defiance. The soil of Heartland ran red with elven blood, and after many losses and sacrifices, the needs of Cyrodiil were free. However, when Empress Alesh died and became Saint Alicia, the rule of the empire fell to the Alician Order, a dogmatic group of fanatics persecuting anyone who does not follow their twisted ways. It is really disheartening to see the First Empire so quickly become the very thing that they fought to destroy. The Alician Order harassed the Druids of High Rock for long enough, and in 330th year of First Era, causing them to depart and seek new lands to settle. One they did in the Sisters Islands. Without the Druids holding them back, protecting the nature, the Direni's power and influence only grew. Around this time, Nords have been venturing past the borders of Skyrim seeking conquest and glory. Upon crossing through Duroadak Mountains, they came across Bretons. Seeing elven features, the Nords attacked, believing them to be their ancient enemy. Soon enough, they realized their mistake, and the word of these half-elves reached the king of Skyrim, Vraj. He assumed that after Night of Tears in Saarthal, the Falmer have taken slaves and fled into High Rock, and the Bretons were descendants of these slaves. This belief has ignited rage and lust for vengeance for his wronged kin. At this time, Nords already had a strong presence in northern parts of High Rock, and following Alician rebellion, many Aelids fled into High Rock seeking refuge among the Direni. After years and decades of warfare against Mer, both Nords and Imperials were eager to root out all traces of elven folk. Cyrodiilic Emperor Amiel agreed to support Nord invasion on the Reach to liberate the Bretons. In 358th year of First Era, the military campaign began, Nord seizing land as far as the mouth of Bjolusay River. To the Nord's surprise, the Bretons have proved loyal to their Direni masters and stood beside them against the combined force of Nords and Imperials. Facing heavy resistance, the Nords battled through and controlled nearly all of High Rock, but were eventually pushed out of the province as King Vrash has overextended his resources, for he was waging war in both High Rock as well as Morrowind. After the conflict ended, the Direni have decided to reinforce the land, and so all major cities passed from Nords to Bretons, who expanded and fortified them. The year 461 of the First Era saw Ryan Direni buy the Isle of Balfira, but the sources never mention from whom this land was purchased. Having Adamantine Tower in his grasp and his faithful Bretons in control of mainland in 477th year of First Era, 1 year later, Ryan Direni expunges all of Alician clergy from High Rock. This was viewed as an act of hostility by the Alicians, and their troops marched for war. The first clashes take place in 480th year of First Era. Initially, the Alicians were pushing deep into Direni territory with series of small victories. However, this conflict would prove to be rather short, for in 492nd year of First Era, the Battle of Glenumbra Moors took place. On one side, the strict and religious order, and on the other, the Bretons once more stood with the Direni, as did the Aelids under the command of the last king of Wild Elves. Unexpectedly, the Nords came to side with High Rock, as the Alicians have attacked Skyrim 2 years prior. Using the mastery of magic of Direni, the battle was won, Alician army broken and routed. This marked the beginning of the end for the Alician Order, but also for the Direni. Their hegemony has spread across many lands, but ultimately they were too few in number to maintain a kingdom. By the year 500 of First Era, the Durenni were nearly gone. In their place the Bretons have stepped in, and many little kingdoms emerged, all vying for power. In turn of events, Bretons who for so long have wholeheartedly defended the Durenni masters, now turned on them, emphasizing that they were in fact men enslaved by the Durenni. Loyalty turned into animosity, and animosity turned into pogrom, and in late 5th century of First Era, the only Durenni remaining were the ones in Balfira. For the next 400 years, the Bretons, now in charge of their own destiny, engaged in craft and trade, but also warfare. Battles, skirmishes, and small-scale conflicts were balanced by growth of cities and populations. Little did they know Hammerfell to south was purged by Redguards who first arrived only 100 years before. The Redguards kept expanding their land, not letting the blood on their swords dry, and 970th year of First Era they staged an assault on Balfira. The Durenni, for centuries confined to their island and fewer in numbers, still retained the power and wisdom of their ancestors and repelled the invaders. While the Yokudans were carving out new kingdom for themselves, the orcs have been congregating in Rothgarian mountains doing the same. Perhaps trying to ally with the Redguards by finding a common foe to fight, King of Daggerfall Julie proposes joint attack on Orsinium, and so in 950th year of First Era, the siege begins. I suppose both Bretons and Redguards had no idea what they so willingly enlisted for. Armies of two kingdoms laid siege to the city of orcs, but the Orsimer ferociously defended their land and way of life. Despite overwhelming odds, outnumbered and surrounded, they dragged the siege out for 30 years. The siege only ended with the death of orc hero Baluf Bloodtusk. 30 years of warfare had exhausted both assailants, and so Julie proposed the duel between orc leader and Gaiden Shinji, perhaps the most skilled blade master ever to live. But they were both deceived. In a true Breton fashion, Julie ordered archers to kill the duelist as they engaged in combat. This honorless betrayal has removed the strongest warriors from both Redguards and orcs. The death of Baluf ended the siege of Orsinium, but not the end of Julie's war. He intended on capturing Hammerfell for himself too, most likely to have full control of Iliac Bay. However, as he and his army marched to Bancorai Pass, his insidious plan was foiled by Makela Leki, another excellent fighter from Yokuda. The Breton army came to a halt and King Julie met his end at the pass. Not long later, in 1029th year of First Era, the slaughter of Greyhost at Bancorai Pass resulted in High Rock joining the First Empire. Forces stationed there were the Anvil, and the army of Alisian Empire were the hammer that smashed the undead menace plaguing the land. At the time, First Empire was ruled by Hestra, who, impressed with Breton's resolve and defiance, offered them a place in the empire, an offer which High Rock accepted. Next 1,000 years hosted no events of high importance. In High Rock, many cities grew into power and became kingdoms of their own. They sure had disagreements and conflicts, but when faced with external threat or common foe, they can put aside their differences and work in unison, like they joined the All Flags Navy after 2200th year of First Era, when Thracian Plague first became known. Breton vessels and sailors, ships and troops, along with others, sailed on to the Coral Kingdom to put an end to Sloat's cruelty. They won, at a great cost, but when they did, sinking the coral structure jutting out of the sea, and yet Thracian Plague would still claim victims for centuries later. Throughout the years, the Alisian Order gained more and more power within the First Empire, but as it usually is, with great power comes great corruption and abuse of power. The clergymen, feeling free of morality and consequences, delved deep into the den of debauchery. After more than 1,000 years, in 2305th year of First Era, High Rock has enough of decadent monks and succeeded from the Alisian Empire. As expected, the Lecherous liturgy have sent out holy legions to punish the Bretons, and as expected, the Bancorai Pass was the rock on which the waves of preachers' swords broke. This marked the beginning of the end for the Alisian Empire, which broke into civil war as Colovia seceded as well. Needing funds for war, Colovian estates started to sell land on the fringes of their territories, and so sisters were sold to High Rock in 2327th year of First Era. 2730 year saw the Second Empire rise. Led by Reman, the empire consisted of Cyrodiil, Skyrim and High Rock. Reman, knowing that the Reachman will always be ungovernable, attempted to put a wedge in between their clans by splitting the Reach between High Rock and Skyrim. Despite being in different provinces, the cities of Evermore and Markarth often faced the same challenge, suppressing the clans of Reachman. Bretons endured the rest of First Era in relative peace and comfort. Then, after 2920 years of First Era, Second Era begins,